Hi everyone, welcome to the April 29th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and we are looking ahead to Saturday at Belmont Park. It really feels like spring has sprung in the New York area with Belmont Park opening this week, and their Saturday feature of this first week of action is the Elusive Quality Stakes, race 9 on a 10-race card. We're going to talk about that a little bit later as we go through the entire late pick 5 sequence. And Craig, we're just talking about it a little bit off air. This is a pretty interesting sequence. We looked at some other tracks, but Belmont's put together a pretty nice card for Saturday. We've got some wide open maiden races that start and close out this sequence, an allowance race in there. I think we're going to have some fun talking about this one.
Yeah, I think these are pretty tough competitive fields. I didn't see any race where horses just jumped out at me as obvious heavy favorites or singles or anything like that. So I do think it's a good, tough card and worth diving into for sure.
We are going to kick things off with race 6 on this 10-race card. It is a maiden special weight event going 7 furlongs on the Widener turf course for fillies and mares. And we've got one MTO in the mix, but a field of 9 signed on that are entered for turf in this race. And Craig, I don't know about you, but among those with turf experience, they're not the most compelling bunch. A lot of horses feel like maybe this isn't the ideal distance for them, or they have other questions to answer like layoffs. So I think this is the kind of race where you do want to keep an open mind about first-time starters.
Yeah, for sure. And it doesn't hurt that the two lowest first-time starters on the morning line are trained by Chad Brown and Todd Pletcher. So we know they're going to draw some interest at the windows. As always, happy when these races are first in the sequence so we can see that. But I don't want to totally dismiss the horses who have run. Of those, the one I would probably use in here would be the 6 Snow Loves a Fight. She was a filly who I thought ran deceptively well her first time on turf. She had run on dirt a couple times. She had some trouble, which isn't mentioned. You can see it at the top of the stretch. Another horse in the field kind of veered out into her, into the lane, and really took her momentum. But I liked how she came running at the end. And she's a horse, if you look at her pedigree, I think she's probably always wanted turf. I'm sure people remember Rainbow Air. He was a really fast turf sprinter. Won some big races, I think even in New York. So she would be the one for me. Of those who have run, some might gravitate towards Big B for Bill Mott. Jose Ortiz, surely going to take some money as you have her pegged, I believe, second choice on the morning line. But her, I'm just not as big a fan of. That last maiden race she ran in just wasn't all that strong. It seems the speed figure was okay for 3-year-olds that time of year as a 93, but the runners out of that race just have not been good. I think only one of them has actually exited the maiden ranks in quite a few tries. So that's where I'll leave it for now. Of the ones that run, I definitely prefer Snow Loves a Fight.
Yeah, we agree on that. Snow Loves a Fight. Her last race is actually one that I highlighted on my Horses to Watch series that I do, looking at horses that had troubled trips. And for all the reasons that you mentioned, Craig, it was just a curious situation because she didn't break that badly, but it seemed like Kendrick Carmouche was intent on getting her as far back in the pack as he possibly could. And another reason that I think that might have worked against her is you might remember watching some of those turf races from opening week at Aqueduct to the Wood Memorial Day. Speed was really holding up well on the turf at Aqueduct. There was some give in the ground. Horses were not really closing from the back of the pack. So I think you want to give Snow Loves a Fight some credit for launching the run that she did, even after kind of having to alter course at the top of the stretch behind some traffic. So I do think that she ran better than it seems in that race. For me, the jury's still out on how good she really is, but I don't feel like this came up the toughest race overall. We'll see what we get from the firsters, but she's definitely one that I would want to have in the mix. And yeah, I was able to poke some holes in some of those others with experience, like Big B that you mentioned. We have the same take on her. I thought the number 8 Dame Time could take some support for Michelle Nevin coming back into that barn, but I find her to be a little bit untrustworthy. She's a horse that I think was a bit of a head case last year. I remember she had like kind of a meltdown pre-race at Saratoga when she didn't run well. That one good turf number that she ran at Belmont going back to last June, that's a race that's worth looking up the chart for because it did not feature that fast of a pace. And the only horses that have been successful coming out of that race are those that closed from farther back in the pack. Those that were part of the pace have really come back and done much poorer in subsequent starts. So I'm a little skeptical of Dame Time. The firsters are horses that you have to consider, and I think the most dangerous of them is the number 2, Gather the Facts for Chad Brown. No surprise about that. She's got enough turf pedigree, being by more than ready. The dam is a half-sister to Akalina, who was a stakes winner on the turf. And this one, I've watched many of her recent workouts. They're almost all on XBTV. You can go and watch them. And most of her turf drills have been in company with an unraced daughter of Lope de Vega, Camp Vega. And they've been pretty hard to separate in the morning. But to me, it always looks like Gather the Facts has something in reserve in her morning workouts. She's really not being asked for her best. Seems like she's the one between the two that the exercise rider has to give a couple reminders to slow down on occasion. And she did have one gate work on the dirt last time, April 23rd. And just note, if you're watching that workout on XBTV, the horses are mislabeled. She's the one that significantly outworked her stablemate. It's labeled the opposite, but you can just kind of see from looking at the other workouts, she's the dark bay horse in that workout, and she was much the best. So it feels like she's got some gate speed and a little bit of ability. I'm not saying anything too clever. I pegged her as the morning line favorite. I'm just giving the reasons for that. I think she's one you have to use. I preferred her to the other one from the hot barn, Todd Pletcher, the number 7 with bells on. That horse does have some turf pedigree, being by American Pharaoh. The dam was 2 for 2 on the turf, but do note, this horse was entered on the dirt about a month ago on a day that was canceled for weather at Aqueduct. So I'm not really sure what to make of that. Todd Pletcher usually likes to start his horses out on the right surface, and I'm not sure if it's a positive that this one was entered on the dirt and now is coming back a month later in a turf race.
Yeah, I'm with you on the firsters. I do prefer the Chad Brown. Agree about Dame Time. And in addition to all the things you said, that is just not a horse that screams 7 furlongs to me. Nothing in those PPs would indicate that horse wants to go an extra furlong farther than she's ever gone before. So, yeah, for me, I will use prominently the Chad Brown horse. Maybe Snow Loves a Fight as a B, and probably with bells on a little lower, but I don't want to get knocked out if Todd Pletcher wins the first leg.
Yeah, and I should just mention before we move on, I'll be interested to see if the number 10 Broadway Boogie takes any money. She is working well, it seems. She's got a real kind of Uncle Mo stride to her. She's got that low head carriage. She's got some fast workouts over the Palm Meadows course for Barclay Tech. It's just, if you look up Barclay Tagg's stats with first-time starters on the turf, they are not good. I think he's 1 for 33 over the past 5 years. I'd actually be more inclined to take the rail horse at a bigger price among the firsters, the number 1, Not So Grim. I know Dave Donk doesn't have the best numbers with firsters either, but this filly is by Nyquist and a half-sister to Vision Perfect, who was an excellent turf sprinter who I think earned almost $1 million. So I know the connections are a little low profile compared to some others in this race, but that's the kind of horse I could use on backup tickets to start out this late pick 5 sequence. Let's move on to race 7. This is an optional claiming 62,500, non-winners of 2 other than, being the allowance condition, going 1 mile and a 16th on the dirt course. And Craig, Chad Brown looms pretty large once again in this race with the number 3 Southern District. If he repeats his last effort, he's going to be pretty tough to beat, because that was an impressive performance.
It was. I guess the one question mark would be it was in the mud, and sometimes you have to be careful of those open length scores on off tracks. But I do like that he did it coming from off the pace. He is a 4-year-old who seems to be moving in the right direction, and he's a horse who's run 4 times on turf, 4 times on dirt, and every one of his dirt figures is better than his best turf figure. So I think Chad Brown's finally going to keep him on dirt for good. And it's a good sign. I almost expected this one to turn up in a stakes race, but you know, when they're running $94,000 allowance races, it's kind of hard to pass those up, I would imagine, when you meet the conditions. So I will definitely be using him in here. The horse that's really a puzzler for me is Waxman. He just did no running whatsoever in that Stymie Stakes. I guess the chart says he had a little bit of an excuse at the bump, but when you watch the replay, I didn't see it, and he just did no running. And I wonder if his best efforts, they all seem to come over those really slow Aqueduct tracks. The track that day at Aqueduct was pretty quick, so my gut on him is just to kind of toss him. He's disappeared for 2 months after basically running every month for a while. So, as one of the short prices, I don't particularly care for him. If Southern District doesn't run its best race, the two that I would be interested in are the two 4 year olds drawn to the inside, the Reds and Sibulus, I assume that is. They both ran nice speed figures, which are as good as anyone in the field outside of Southern District's last race, and they seem to be improving, moving in the right direction. Particularly Sibulus, he looks like he could be lone speed in here. So I don't want to just hand the race to Chad Brown here. I do think the inside two are pretty good. I'm sure you'll cover them all, but I really am interested on your take on Waxman.
Yeah, he's a difficult horse to know what to do with. I mean, he and Southern District, the last time that they faced off was in that kind of slow mile and an eighth race over that deep aqueduct surface, and Waxman was just easily better over Southern District, but I feel like a mile and an eighth is probably too far for Southern District. That seems like it's really in Waxman's wheelhouse. And turning back to the mile last time, like you said, Waxman just didn't have any early speed. And what's concerning to me is, Craig, I think we've discussed this horse on the forecast before, and you might remember watching some of his early races. He's a horse that if you don't ride him every step of the way, he sometimes just comes out of the bridle and loses contact with the field. Like he loses interest in his races. And it seemed like when Todd Pletcher put the blinkers on three back, it had cured that. He had been racing more in the bridle, showing better tactical speed, but it's like getting into that stymie last time, like a little thing went wrong at the break and it undid all of the good work that had been done, because once again, he was not interested early in the race, too far back. It just seemed like he never got engaged. And I don't know, Todd Pletcher, when these horses show this much unprofessionalism in their sixth career start, given the amount of schooling that Todd puts into these horses to get them to, show up and be professional in the afternoon, to me, it's really not a good sign when a horse like Waxman starts to turn in the other direction again. So I'm pretty skeptical of him in this race. And with Irad Ortiz climbing aboard, I do think he's going to take plenty of money. So between the two favorites, I definitely prefer Southern District. My one caveat with Southern District, Craig, is he ran on that Withers Day back on February 5th. And that was a track you might remember where you did not want to be inside. All the best running was out in the center of the racetrack. And Southern District really got the perfect trip that day, just stalking widest of all, making that looping move into the stretch and winning off impressively. The number checks out. I mean, there have been runbacks out of the race, and it seems legitimate. It's just he really did have everything go his way last time, and he's another one that's not always the easiest horse to ride. So I'm curious to see if he can repeat that performance, because if he does, he's stakes caliber. And like you said, Chad Brown's deciding not to take a shot in a stakes off that performance last time. But this horse has been entered MTO in a number of stakes since then. So I think Chad Brown's been searching around, kind of deciding whether or not to go in a stakes with him. I know they had talked a little bit about the Carter, but Chad had reinvestment risk for that race instead. So they haven't been quite sure what to do with him, which I think accounts for the layoff. But I do prefer him of the two favorites. I don't have a whole lot to say about the two horses drawn down towards the inside, Craig. I guess they do have a right to improve as 4-year-olds. I was not a big fan of either one of them. I guess the number 2, which I would assume is Sibelius. I guess he could be named after the classical music composer. He is the speed in this race. I don't totally trust them to repeat that last performance. For me, that's kind of one of those aqueduct speed figures that's a bit of a head scratcher when Sibelius was second at 34-1, but I don't know, maybe he's just turned a corner and he will be in front in this race. My pick would be the number 5, Tiergan, and I know when you just immediately take a glance at Tiergan's form, it seems like it's all over the place. He's showing up one day, not showing up the next, losing some races by big margins, but when you really start to dissect things, he runs his best races when he's going one turn. He also is a horse that doesn't really relish a muddy or sloppy sealed track anymore. He handled it early in his career, but it seems like recently he just doesn't care for that kind of surface. And when you start to pick things apart and you look for his one-turn races, his races on dry tracks, his form looks a lot more positive, and he's got speed figures, even two-back when he got that 120 that put him right in the mix against a horse like Southern District. The Rudy Rodriguez barn, I mean, they've been sending out some pretty live runners lately, so I view him as a major danger, and I think he'll be a decent enough price.
Yeah, I could see that. I actually did mean to touch on him. I assume the track was sealed last time, and that's why you brought that up. And even though it doesn't look like he ran bad, I mean, he ran second, but his speed figure tailed off quite a bit. So I was wondering about that. And you make a good point about Rudy Rodriguez. Oftentimes he's hot at Aqueduct, but it did seem to carry over to Belmont yesterday. So he's going to be on my tickets as well.
Let's move on to race 8. This is a New York bred allowance event. Non-winners of 1 going a mile and a 16th on the inner turf course with that kind of awkward starting position at Belmont, crossing over the turf down that dog leg. So, Craig, we've got a field of 10 signed on here that are eligible for this race. There are a lot of AEs that we're not going to talk about because there's another race for the same condition that is drawn on Sunday, and a lot of the AEs that are entered here are in that Sunday race, so they will scratch out of this race. We're just going to go with the main body of the field, and it's a pretty competitive affair. I would say the horse to beat is probably Umbria on the outside. The fact that he's got some good recent dirt form is probably a positive indicator for how he's coming into this race, because it does seem like he's a slightly better turf horse.
It does. I worry about the post a little bit from this awkward place, although these races are so odd that I don't even know that you can count on that so much. Maybe the outside's a little bit of an advantage even because the inside has such a weird start in these. That's something I've actually been meaning to look up some statistics and haven't got around on it. So maybe this will give me the impetus to finally do it. But I agree. One thing I found interesting in here is this race is for 3 and up. And I think there's actually 3 3-year-olds in here. And I got to be honest, I'm tossing all of them right away. I usually don't do that. If this was a dirt race, I wouldn't think that way. But it just seems too early for me on turf for 3-year-olds to try to take on their older horses already. And some of them might take a little bit of money. So I'm just not going to use them. And I agree with you. Umbria probably looks like the horse to beat. He usually runs good on the turf. But this race, I'm going to spread a little bit wider in here. I'll use some others like Lord Flintshire. I thought he ran fine last time. I do worry that Jorge Abreu isn't the greatest layoff trainer, but you know, he does draw Irad Ortiz, so I assume he's pretty well meant in here. The horse that I would probably make my top pick if I was playing this just as a vertical race would be the 7 Saratoga Flash. He's a horse who's coming back as a first-time gelding. We haven't seen him since last year in November for Barclay Tag. And he actually had the figures to compete. He's a horse who's mostly spent his time sprinting and going a mile. But it just seems to me like the gelding maybe might be the answer because he's a horse who just doesn't seem to put it all together in his races, usually is backing up a little through the lane, and it's just a race I don't think looks very tough on paper, so any kind of improvement from that gelding, and I think he'd be really strong in here.
I do agree that this does not look like the toughest New York bred allowance race, so I'm willing to get a little creative in this race. And yeah, I have no major problems with Umbria or the horse that you mentioned, who I've got as the second choice on the morning line, Lord Flintshire. I will say Lord Flintshire's last running line, it looks a lot more impressive on paper than it does when you go back and watch it, because it seems like he made this big rally from 12th, a dozen lengths off the pace to just miss. When you watch the replay, it really never looked like he was getting there. There was a race that was just kind of falling apart at the end. A lot of horses were closing. He was basically moving at the same pace as the top 2 finishers at the end. So he's a horse that generally leaves himself with a little bit too much to do, and he doesn't always have an extra push to make that run past the final horse to win races. So we'll see what we get from Lord Flintshire here. Saratoga Flash, Craig, he's a difficult one for me because I've long held this opinion with this horse that he barely wants to go a mile, doesn't want to go a step beyond that, and I do think he's better going shorter. Like you were saying, he just does not really finish off his races, and I have some real concerns about him tackling this mile and 16th coming off the layoff. I know Barclay Tag's a trainer that thinks every horse can run a mile and a half sometimes, but I prefer this horse at a 7 furlong race, to be honest. But like you said, he's got figures, and it's not the toughest field in the world. But that kind of leads me to going in a different direction here, and I wanted to look for a little bit of a new face. Like you, I wasn't quite convinced about the 3-year-olds, so I went with the number 6, Mr. Breadwinner, who is a 4-year-old, even though he's pretty lightly raced. This is just the 3rd start of his career. He's making the transition to turf for Horacio De Paz after a couple dirt races, and I liked the way he ran with the blinkers on last time. He was much more aggressive early, ridden to take the lead. It wasn't the toughest field in the world, but he just dominated that race in the mud on the front end. And watching him run that day, I got the impression that turf is not going to be a huge problem. I know that he does not have some screaming turf pedigree. Tonalist is okay as an influence. He's got some Giants Causeway on the dam side, though it's not like the dam has been some turf producer. But just watching this horse run, I feel like the turf is not going to be a huge issue for him. And I know the TimeformUS pace projector is predicting a fast pace. We'll see about that. I don't see that much need the lead speed in this field. I mean, we've got horses like Sandro the Great and Saratoga Flash as those that are supposed to be pushing the pace, but neither one of those necessarily is a need the lead type. So I think Mr. Breadwinner is going to be on the lead once again. And sometimes coming out of that awkward chute at Belmont, riders are not that aggressive and the pace slows down a little bit. So I'm hoping that's what happens with Mr. Breadwinner.
Yeah, I could see that. And it's interesting you mentioned Sandro the Great, because he's a horse who, when he runs on dirt, does tend to show speed and plenty of it. But when he moves the turf, it doesn't. So just a future note, maybe that's something I could work on when horses have multiple races on different surfaces. But normally you don't see that kind of thing with a horse. If they show speed on dirt, they almost always show it on turf. So he's kind of an oddball in here. And I've got no problem with Mr. Breadwinner. Certainly, because this is not a very strong race. You can see it in the TimeformUS race rating, only a 102 predicted. So that's just not very strong for this class. So, like I said, I'm going to cast a pretty wide net in this one, I think.
Yeah, one more horse I do want to touch on. Did you consider the number 4 Rally Squirrel at all? Because he was the kind of the last horse that I tossed, and I really wasn't sure what to do with him in this race. His turf effort 2-back at Gulfstream for Mike Maker, it gives him a shot here, that first start off the claim for the Maker barn. But I've got to say, I did not like his New York form from last year, so I'm kind of two minds about him.
Yeah, he was a real question mark for me. On one hand, you kind of look at that Gulfstream race. He was able to come from off the pace. First time for Mike Maker, who doesn't always do that great first time with horses. And then he got stuck in one of those off the turf races. So I could see using him. I think the thing that dissuaded me most was the fact that he's probably going to take money. I saw your 4-1 morning line. And in a race that I'm going to use probably more than a few horses, he just seemed like a bit of a reach, but I couldn't blame anybody for using him. I mean, he fits with that 100 speed figure. He ran a couple back. Fits just fine with plenty others in here.
Yeah, we do have a lot of the top riders in the country now coming back to New York or coming to New York, and you see Joel Rosario's named on this horse, so that's probably going to attract some attention in his direction. Flavian Pratt's got mounts at Belmont on Sunday's card, which I just finished up doing the morning lines for. So the riding colony is about to get a lot deeper in New York this weekend. Let's move on to the feature event on this Saturday card, Craig. Race 9, the Elusive Quality, going 7 furlongs on the Widener turf course. 11 horses signed on for this one. The number 6 value proposition, I pegged him at 3-1 on the morning line. This seems like a wide open race to me, but I'm not going to be surprised if this horse goes off shorter than that, maybe even 2-1. It just seems like this is a horse that the bettors love to go for. He doesn't always win, but he's run some big speed figures and he's got the connections in his corner that take a lot of money. So he makes sense in this race, but this is not the type of affair where I'd want to take too short a price on anybody.
No, I agree. I think this is a pretty solid race. It does seem like with value proposition, Chad Brown has kind of figured out where he belongs. He was a horse who ran in some pretty high-level races early on in his career, but he's just not that kind of horse. He is more of a listed stakes grade 3 type. I think 7 furlongs is a good fit for him. His last race was, I'm kind of tossing that one out. Even though he ran fine, I think he'll probably run better in here. It was a race where Manny Franco got aggressive with him, took him to the lead. It didn't really work out, but, it wasn't, I'm not saying it was a bad ride. I know I've talked about this before. He took a shot with it, but it just kind of took him out of his position. So I think he's going to run fine on the turn back. The only real question with him is the price. What's it going to be? And we don't know. And I'm kind of in your camp. I think he'll be 5-2, 2-1 range. But there are some others in here who could take some money. So I'll start with a couple horses that will probably take some money that I don't like. The first one is on the outside, Therapist. He's a 7-year-old for Christophe Clement, gets Joel Rosario, but he just seems like a horse who's lost a few steps, which isn't always the case as these horses get older on turf, but I personally haven't liked his last couple races. I think he's underachieved in a lot of these spots, so he's one I'm not going to use on my tickets. Another one would be the 3-horse Proven Strategy. I bring him up because 2 of his last 3 races, he's run big speed figures that would be very competitive in this field. But when I look at those races, the last one was a wire-to-wire score at Gulfstream Park, setting a slow pace. We know that's a turf course that's going to favor that kind of style. And this just seems like such a different race. He'd have to run a little quicker. So I'm against Proven Strategies in here as well. One horse that caught my eye, and maybe I'm just a sucker for a cool name, is Milton the Monster, the 9-horse. He's a horse who I actually tried to beat Greenlight Go with a couple back in the Stymie, and I thought he ran okay that day. But the mile just seemed to be a little bit far for him. He went back to Parks, won another, or he actually ran at Laurel, won another race with a nice speed figure. But what's interesting to me is it's his first time on turf, and he looks like he's bred the turf for me, being by Jack Milton out of Raging Storm. So I'll leave the breeding part to you, but those 2 I'm definitely going to use on my tickets. A couple more horses I want to talk about, but for sure I'll use Value Proposition just because I think he's the most likely winner. And I do like Milton the Monster moving the turf.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Milton the Monster. I'm not going to rehash what you said about those other favorites. We completely agree about Proven Strategies, Value Proposition, and Therapist. But Milton the Monster, I know we've talked about this horse on the forecast before, probably when we handicapped that Stymie. Every time this horse comes up, I feel like I say I would love to see this horse on the turf. This horse, I think, was entered in a turf race at Aqueduct, I want to say 2 years ago, before he even got good early in his career. And I remember seeing him and watching some of his races and saying to myself, oh, I love that this horse is finally getting a chance on the turf. And then they scratched him, and they never ran him on the turf again after that. So he's getting his chance. They picked a pretty tough spot to do it in, but I do believe the 7 furlongs is the perfect distance for Milton the Monster. And like you said, he's by Jack Milton, and if you go through Formulator and look at the best progeny of Jack Milton, which you can do, it gives you a list of the top 20 speed figure earners and their PPs for every sire. Milton the Monster is a real outlier in Jack Milton's progeny. They are all turf horses, except for this guy. So he's never gotten a chance on the turf. I'll be really interested to see if he handles it. And one reason that I think he might is he's one of these sloppy sealed track freaks. Like when they pack down that dirt course, it's like he turns into a completely different racehorse. So maybe that's an indication that he's going to like the turf. I don't see that much speed in this race beyond Proven Strategies, and I think he's going to work out a nice trip stalking that one. So we'll see what price he is. I've got him at 12-1 in the morning line. He's the kind of horse I would want to price on, but I think he's pretty interesting too, Craig. I want to know who else you like in this race, but there's a horse that I do want to get your take on, the number 8, Toro Strike. He's a real head scratcher for me because he was pretty impressive in some of his European races, faced some good horses over there. He's got some large Timeform ratings that would make him awfully tough in this spot, but what do you do with that race at the fairgrounds last time? It was so bad.
He's the other horse that I'm going to use in here, and it's just kind of in my head, he can't be as bad as he showed last time. And I just wonder if that 5.5 furlong distance in a race that had a really quick pace, the really fast sprinter Just Might in there, just maybe kind of caught that horse. I'm sure the pace was probably nothing like that in its race overseas. So maybe it was just a bit of a wake-up call. And I expect them to be better at the 7 furlongs. I mean, that last race, if he runs that, obviously he's not even a contender in here, but I like that Todd Pletcher puts him in here. It's not like he dropped him back into an allowance, and I just think maybe it was the distance. So he was the other one I'm going to use on my tickets. As for one other horse, I guess we really should talk about is Snapper Sinclair, since he's pretty low on your morning line at just 4-1 second choice. He's the horse I personally just don't know what to do with. My gut just tells me that 7 furlongs is not what this horse wants. He's tough to get a read on because I don't want to say he's mismanaged because he's won a ton of money in his career, but he just bounces around between dirt and turf. He's even had a synthetic start in there. He always seems to run well, but the one thing he never really does is sprint on the turf. He did early in his career. He won a 7 furlong race, but that was at Kentucky Down, so it was probably more like a mile and 70 yards or something when you really add it all together. So he was the real puzzle for me, but my gut is not to use him.
Yeah, I don't know what to do with Snapper Sinclair either. I actually like the 7 furlongs for him quite a bit. I think the distance really suits him. He ran a big race in that Eddie D down the hill at Santa Anita last fall. I mean, just missing to Lieutenant Dan, who came right back and ran very well in the Breeders' Cup. So I feel like the 7 furlongs is not an issue for Snapper Sinclair. My problem with him is his best turf races have been at Kentucky Downs. I think he's won 4 turf races in total. 3 of those victories have been in those lucrative Kentucky Downs races, which is why he's won over $1 million in his career on the turf. I'm concerned about his current form, though, Craig. Like, he's always been competitive on every surface, but his recent dirt efforts have been just pretty disappointing. And he's coming back on awfully short rest after that trip to Dubai. I think it's been just 5 weeks. That's kind of atypical for a horse to come back that quickly. So I don't know what to do with this horse. I'm a little bit wary of him, and if he does take money anywhere near that 4-1 morning line, I'd probably want to go in a different direction. I made my top pick the number 1 Penalty. I know that he looks a little bit inferior on speed figures, but I've always liked the 7 furlongs for this horse. I think this is really the right distance for him. I thought he ran great the last time he tried 7 furlongs in that optional claimer 3 back at Belmont when there was just absolutely no pace on. He closed down that field from last to first. There were some good horses in there, including Chewing Gum and Kantaka, horses who had been competitive in stakes and did okay after that. Penalty made 2 more starts in 2021. He had no chance in that race against Alexandra and Raging Bull, that poker. That was just too tough a spot for him. And then last time out, he ran at Kentucky Downs, and I don't want to be too hard on him for that race. Sometimes horses just don't show up at Kentucky Downs if you're not Snapper Sinclair. He's returning as a new gelding. I was reading some quotes in Dave Grenning's article from Belmont just saying this has always been a really difficult horse to train. He's not the nicest one, so they finally gelded him late in his career, and he's been more manageable. We'll see what we get for him. He's going to need pace to close into for sure, but when the trip works out and when he's going that shorter 7 furlong distance, he does typically have a nice finish on him. So if I want to price on him, I think 10-1 that I've got him out of the morning line would be fair. But he's the direction that I went in this race, just trying to search for some value.
Yeah, I can see that. I have no argument with him. You make a lot of good points. And the first gelding, I guess it pays to read Dave Grenning. I follow him on Twitter, always read what he says. Sometimes I'm not diligent enough to read all the articles. I got to do better with that, I guess.
Well, Craig, let's close things out with this maiden special weight event going 6.5 furlongs for the New York breds. And doesn't get too much more wide open than this. There's some form in this race, but I wouldn't say that anybody really stands out among those with experience, and there are a number of firsters that could potentially be live. It feels like it could be a spread race to close out the sequence.
Yeah, this one is tough, and you could go in a lot of directions. I guess I'll just jump right in with the horse that I'm actually would use as an A horse who's going to be a price, and that's a horse New York Anthem who's shipping in for Tyler Service. I watched his race at Parks. It says he was bumped at the start. He did get a little bump in there. It was nothing too serious, but I just wonder how much that horse was well meant, given that he was only running for 42,000 as a New York bred, and now ships into Belmont running for nearly double that purse. And he actually ran pretty well. That 88 speed figure fits in here pretty well with the horses who have run. So a few of them have run into the 90s, but for example, the one horse who's done it the most is the number 1 horse, Sinful Dancer, and he almost seems like one of those professional maidens who always seems to run well but never seems to win. So I'm taking a shot with a price in here as an A in New York Anthem. There's definitely a couple others you'd want to use in here. I wouldn't want to get beat if Sinful Dancer won, so I'm going to use Sam. Alster had an excuse first time out and ran a decent enough race. Watching it, I wasn't as impressed as I thought I would be when I read the comments, but it was okay. And those are some I would start with, but I'll turn it back to you and come back with one or two more.
Well, I don't want to talk you off a price. I mean, I think New York Anthem, for those Parks connections, will be a substantial odds in this race. He was not one that I was interested in, though. I would like New York Anthem if they were running him in a turf race, because he's got plenty of turf pedigree. And I was kind of, when I saw him entered, it was an MTO earlier this week, and I was like, why is he the MTO? He should be entered for the turf because he's got plenty of turf pedigree. But they're running him in the dirt race. I didn't really like the race that he's coming out of at Parks, but we'll see what we get from him. He'll be a big price, so if you like him at a price, use him. It's tough to know where to go. I feel like in some ways, even though I have him as the second choice on the line, Ouster, the number 11, is a good place to kind of anchor your discussion around because he ran pretty well on debut. He was 15-1 that day, so it's not like there were any stories on him for Mark Hennig. And Hennig is a trainer that does not have good second time out stats. He's much better with first time starters than he is second time out. But the fact that this horse was not well meant first time out and ran like he was a little bit green, had some trouble at the start, was running on late between horses, I feel like there is the potential he could improve. I'm just wondering what kind of price he's going to be in this race. I would use him, but I wasn't so in love with him that I would want to exclude others. Among those with experience, the horse that interests me the most, Craig, is the number 5 Majority Partner, who is making his first start against New York Breds here. He made one start at Gulfstream Park earlier in March against Open Company, and that was among the toughest maiden fields that I think was assembled at Gulfstream Park all winter. It was a fast race. I know we've talked about it a couple times on this show. Uniki, who won, came back at Keeneland last week and just missed in a reasonably fast allowance race. But 4 horses have come back out of that maiden special weight on March 12th and won, most of them with improved speed figures. Now, Majority Partner was beaten 22 lengths that day, but he was sent off at 60-1, and he just landed in a spot that was way too tough for him. I mean, it's not like it's not like his speed figure that he earned of 76 puts him that far off some horses that, achieved much better against New York Breds in their prior starts. So I think there's upside for this guy. Jeremiah Engard has good numbers with second-time starters. He's got a series of fast workouts showing since that race, and I did go back and look up the DRF Clocker report for his first race at Gulfstream, and even though he went off that huge price, Mike Welsh and his team had given positive reviews to the way this horse was working. So I wonder if there's a little bit more here than meets the eye, and he feels like one that could fly a bit under the radar in this race.
Yeah, I wasn't not going to use him. He's definitely one of the 2 horses that I was using because he comes out of that strong Uniki race. It just seemed like he was in over his head. This is a huge drop in class, so he's one I'm going to use. And the other one I have to use is the one just inside of him, Tapping the Bank. Brad Cox just has great numbers in these spots. There wasn't a whole lot to like in his first out, but I can excuse that because Brad Cox doesn't really often send them out. When they are lukewarm on the board like this one was at 9-2, they generally are given a race. Now, something obviously went amiss because we haven't seen him since September, but I expect a big run from this one as well at a price. So those are the 2 others I'll be using.
And we should give a brief mention to some of the first-time starters drawn towards the center of the pack because there are 3 of them that go out for very dangerous barns: Christophe Clement, Chad Brown, and Jorge Abreu. I made the Chad Brown runner basis risk the slight favorite, just kind of by default. It feels like these horses always take some money for that barn, and this horse did sell for $310,000 as a yearling. I don't know what to make of the fact that he's now debuting as a gelding because I'm sure he did not sell for $310,000 as a gelding. He was gelded since then. So I don't know about that. It's not like he's got some big pedigree, and I don't know a whole lot about his workouts. The one of the firsters that interests me the most is the number 8, 2 for Charging, for Jorge Abreu, a trainer that just has fantastic statistics with firsters and dirt sprints especially. This runner's got some fast workouts showing, a couple of them that I can match up just from looking at the workout lists are that worked back on March 31st. Looks like it was in company with Runaway Rumor, who is a turf stakes horse for Abreu, and on April 9th with Agility, a stakes-placed 3-year-old New York bred. So this horse might have been working with some decent ones, and I know that pedigree doesn't look that appealing at first glance. Will Take Charge. The dam's a half to a Mother Goose winner, so there is some pedigree there. We'll see what we get from him. Jose Ortiz is taking the mount. He's one that I'd want to have on my tickets.
I have to ask, where did you see basis risk as a gelding? Because he's showing as a colt in TimeformUS and Daily Racing Form.
Oh, you know what? It is showing as a gelding in the past performances that I printed early, but that must have been a late change that he is not a gelding. So thanks for correcting that, Craig.
I wasn't sure. That's why I brought it up. I didn't want to lead people astray. So yeah, I wasn't sure what to do with him, and I'm still not. It's just going to kind of come down to how I construct my ticket. I tend to prefer the horses who have run this late in the year, but we'll see. They're tough. It's not the strongest field that we're going to see, but I prefer the second-time starters or horses that have run a couple times to the first-timers.
Well, Craig, let's briefly go back and do a recap because we covered a lot of ground in this sequence. It's not an easy one to construct a ticket because even though there are some favorites in here, I don't know if they're ones that we necessarily want to lean on. So I'll let you go first. Just kind of go back through the sequence quickly and, talk about where you might lean.
All right, yeah. So the first leg, the maiden special weight, I'm going to lean on, of the horse who ran, I'm going to use Snow Loves a Fight, Gather the Facts, the Chad Brown I'm going to use, and then with Bells on the first-time starter for Todd Pletcher, I would use Lesser more as like a C-type. In the 7th race, I definitely am going to lean on Southern District. I'm not going to use Waxman in there. And then I'm going to use the 2 inside horses, the Reds and Sibelius, as more BC types. In the 8th race at Allowance on the turf, this is one I would spread a little bit more, I think. As you mentioned, none of the AEs are likely to be in the race, but I'm going to use horses like Umbria, Lord Flintshire, Saratoga Flash. Don't particularly love any of them. It's a leg I just want to get through, so it's going to be a couple more than that even. I would probably go as many as 5 deep. In the feature, I'm really intrigued by Milton the Monster trying the turf for the first time. He's going to be a big price, so I want to use him. I do think value proposition on the turn back to 7 furlongs off of that race where they tried something a little different that didn't work out over a turf course that had a lot of give in it, which I don't think we're going to see at Belmont. So I think he's a strong player in here. Those would be the 2 main ones. And you've talked me into using Penalty since he's been gelded and seems to have made a difference. So I'll have him on my tickets. And then that last race, I'm going to use a long shot as one of my keys in here, and that's New York Anthem. And then use a couple others, Alster, Basic Risk, to name a few.
Yeah, I think we're tackling the sequence pretty similarly, just going in different directions in a few races. I would lean a little bit on 2 horses in that first leg, Gather the Facts, the Chad Brown firster, and the number 6, Snow Loves a Fight. I'd have the number 1 in there as a backup for Dave Donk. I just think that horse might offer some value. But I would try to narrow down the first race a little bit. And like you said, Craig, it's one where you can see the board before you put your tickets in, so you can check out if any of the other firsters are taking a lot of money. In race 7, I would lean on Tiergan trying to beat Southern District and Waxman a little bit, though I do respect Southern District and would want to have him prominently on my tickets, but Tiergan is my top pick there. In race 8, I don't want to lean too hard on anybody. I made Mr. Breadwinner my top pick, but I would certainly use Umbria. I would use Lord Flintshire. They're the main 3 for me, and if I guess I was going to have some extra money to play around with, maybe I would include horses like Timbuktu and Rally Squirrel on a backup ticket, but I would probably try to narrow things down a little bit because there are other places to spread in this sequence. In the Elusive Quality, I like Penalty, I like Milton the Monster. They're both supposed to be prices in this race, so I would use them each. I'm not going to leave out Value Proposition. He's a horse that I would want to have in my tickets. I just don't want to emphasize him in this race because I feel like he will be the favorite. And, beyond those, I could even throw in a horse like the number 2 Big Package on a C type backup ticket on an ABC wager because he's a horse that had kind of a crazy trip last time. I didn't really talk about him during the race, but he's one that I could use on a backup ticket at a big price. And then we'll close things out with a few horses that I want to focus on, including the 5 Majority Partner, who I made my top pick, that Firster, the number 8, 2 for Charging, who I think is interesting. And then the number 11, Ouster, who I just think is fairly logical, but could be among the favorites. And if your budget allows for it, maybe you could use some other backups like that Chad Brown Firster, Basis Risk, or the Christophe Clement Firster, or the number 4, Tap into Bank, who I agree with Craig on his assessment of that horse. But definitely a lot of ways to go in the finale and a few races in this sequence, Craig.
Yeah, and I actually left out Toro Strike, another horse I want to use in the Elusive Quality that you brought up, just because I think the distance is going to make a big difference for him, and I expect him to run a lot better than he did at the fairgrounds. So I guess we can take a breather now before next week, where I assume we're going to be pretty busy.
Yeah, I've got a lot going on next week. No surprise about that with the Kentucky Derby coming up. Craig, we haven't talked about it in detail yet, but I think we're probably going to do just one podcast next week, focusing on the Kentucky Derby. I know we haven't dived into it too deep yet, or deeply yet from the pace projector standpoint, or looking at the TimeformUS PPs. So we'll try to do that next week, perhaps right after the post position draw, which I want to say happens on Monday. I probably should know that by this point. But we're going to put out a podcast about the Derby at some point. And Craig, I know you're also going to join me for a Kentucky Derby preview video a little bit later in the week. So that'll be out on DRF's YouTube channel. Oh, well, that's great news. Like you said, it is rare to have foreign shippers be significant pace presences in a race like this on the dirt. But that does seem like it's the case with especially Summerist tomorrow coming out of that UAE Derby. So I'll be looking out for that, Craig, and interested to see it. Well, that's it for the TimeformUS Forecast this week. Remember that you can always catch these DRF podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure to hit the subscribe button on the Daily Racing Form channel. Everybody, thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to be back with us next week for our Kentucky Derby previews.